The New World Symphony, where I am one of the media team members, just started recently releasing a new performance series called My Miami, which put my field recording experience and skills and equipment to the test. My Miami is a series where members of the New World Symphony Orchestra identify places that are particularly important to them out in the community, and then they do short performances and we film them and eventually release them on YouTube in what we hope is very high quality and is very enjoyable for you guys. The first of these releases were 2 George Gershwin piano arrangements. This particular location had very interesting challenges. We were directly underneath the Metro Rail track, so you hear trains going over every so often, so there was this issue of timing takes to try to alleviate that, which we were not always successful in doing. There's just the general environmental noise. It's outside the entrance to this big metro station in downtown Miami, where there's always lots of people and chickens and street vendors and all kinds of other environmental noise. Another aspect was the environment itself. This was early summer, which in Miami means incredible temperatures and incredible humidity, which does not always play nice with microphones, particularly condenser microphones. I had done some test recordings. We had luckily gotten the instrument the week before, so I had an opportunity to do some game planning about where I was going to put the mics and what mics I was going to use. When we arrived to the shoot, everything was ultimately going okay. My primary mics were a pair of DPA Omni Lavs. Why Lavs, do you ask? That was actually the suggestion of Roberto Toledo, who's the head engineer at New World. We have this competing priority of trying to hide the microphones. It's supposed to look like the whole scene is very organic and not artificial, but also capturing a decent stereo image and decent quality pickup of the instrument. And in testing, this proved to be great. The DPAs can handle a great deal of volume. They have great imaging. They're tiny, so you can just kind of drop them inside the lid and close it, which was great for isolation. So I set those up, was doing a couple sound checks with the pianist, and then 5 minutes before the call for the first take, the mics quickly sizzled and died. I still don't know what the ultimate issue was. I believe it was related to either temperature or humidity or both. Luckily, I had brought some backup microphones, which, let that be the first lesson of this video. Always have a backup. And in this case, it was a pair of mics from this company, Lom, the MikroUsis? I don't know how you pronounce it. So these little guys right here. Tiny little Omni capsules, very convenient, pretty much like the DPAs, slightly larger. I actually tested the Lom MikroUsis in my home upright because I wanted more chance to play around with placement when I was initially doing my tests with the actual instrument that we used. I had only a little bit of time with it, so I wanted to play around to see optimal placement for the stereo imaging, for balanced pickup inside the cabinet. And they worked okay, but I noticed at that time there was a slight issue. They have a lower max sound pressure level, SPL, threshold than the DPAs. And I noticed this with my own playing, but it became immediately apparent when I had to swap the DPAs out for the Lom mics that they could not handle the dynamics of the piano or the pianist. And so I had to have a very, very reasonable but uncomfortable conversation with the pianist about controlling her dynamics as she played, because, and you'll see if you go watch these videos, it's a very, stride piano bouncing all over the place, heavy playing. She actually drops her elbow on the piano keyboard sometimes. I had to ask her to lay back on the dynamics, which telling a performer that they can't play the way they want to play is never a good idea. But all that aside, we did manage to get several decent takes. They were not perfect. There is distortion, which I'm going to show you. But I just want to share this because part of field recording is dealing with these challenges as they come up and having some kind of game plan. You're never going to get a perfect take when you're out in the wild. It's just there's too many factors going on. It's too unpredictable. But you can set yourself up for the most success by having a plan B, a plan C, etc. So let's head over to the session and I'll give you a little rundown on where I started with the piano sound and where things ultimately ended up and my choices for mixing processing. Okay, so here we are. This is an alternate take from the one that was used in the video on YouTube, But here, let's get a sense of the piano sound. So you can see decent image. It's not super stereo. It's not super wide. One of the shortcomings of this setup I found is that below a certain register in the piano keys, because of the way that in lower frequencies tending to propagate much further and longer, the localization of the lower keys is not super clear. It's great on the high register, but the low register tends to sound a little bit monophonic. Take a quick look at one of the distortion areas I mentioned. Here's the climax of the piece, the end. And you can hear it really at several points throughout here, but specifically on the last two hits, which are the pianist literally dropping her elbow onto the piano. So not the cleanest recording, but I will give props to Izotope RX, which I'm using right now, which is really invaluable in my experience for cleaning up this kind of stuff in post. I had to do a lot of declipping, which is a de-overloading function they have built in. A lot of it was done manually to avoid introducing artifacts as much as possible. If you get aggressive with this, it tends to really funk around with the frequency response and you can really hear it. But for this, let's just do a quick algorithmic detection. So this is going to suggest this threshold setting, and we can render this out and do an A/B comparison and see if it improves the distortion at all. Still hear it on the second hit, but check out this first one. I think that's pretty clean. We'll just isolate the first one. Here's before. Got a little crackle on the transient, and here's after. Program does a decent job of saving overloaded recordings. Like I said, you have to have a light touch with it and do a lot of manual adjustment with the thresholds for declip, but it's amazing how effective this is. All right, so let's move over to the mix session. I've removed all the processing. So this is the baseline piano sound that we had. So the first thing I always like to do is take a corrective EQ approach. It's a decent all-around piano sound. However, there's not a lot of brilliance to it, not a lot of high end. So this is the EQ curve that I ended up utilizing. It's pretty extreme, but sometimes extremity is called for. So here is untreated, no EQ. Here's with EQ added. So a lot of the wooliness goes away. There's a lot more focus to the actual keys and the mechanics of the piano, which I actually like. The context of this larger piece is that it was mixed with a bunch of environmental sound design that was used almost like musical instruments in the way that they were employed. So the piano really needed to be percussive and clear. For this particular application, once in context, it was essential that the piano have a ton of high-end information in order to cut through the mix. So following that, there's a little bit of 1176 compression. So this 1176 is really only doing a couple minor things. It's controlling the absolute max peaks that she's playing. So just the smallest fractional dB of dynamic control when she's playing really loud. And it's adding a little bit of classic 1176 distortion, which helps again to emphasize the high end of the piano and bring out the detail, the crispiness. So I'll do an A/B comparison with it on and off so you just get a sense of what it's doing. Here's untreated, uncompressed. With compression. We have following the 1176 is a vintage style compressor. This is doing actually a modest amount of dynamic compression. There's a lot of environmental sound design on top of this, and in order to help the piano stand out, it needed to have a little bit more of a narrow dynamic range. So here is without. And here's with. Next up, we have tape compression or tape processor. I am a big fan of what tape saturation does in terms of adding pleasing harmonics and pleasing distortion. It's used in a very subtle way. I'll A/B it like I have everything else, but this is just to add further interest to the mid-range and the high range of the instrument. So here is without. With it turned on. It's incredibly subtle. You probably wouldn't know it was there if I didn't tell you or didn't show you. Listening in context, it adds just a little more sparkle and a little more complexity to the high end of the instrument, which I like. Now I've got this big, bold piano sound. We've cleaned up the original recording, made the high end a little more clear. We've added a little bit of flavorful distortion and dynamic control with the compressors and the tape saturation. This EQ is now just a secondary cleanup that's meant to balance the frequency response of the instrument overall, because now it's actually quite thick in the low mids, and we're going to employ this to help it just sit a little bit more better within itself across the frequency spectrum. Here's without it on. And here's with it on. Last process in the chain is a dynamic compressor. So I've actually made great use of this tool, another Izotope endorsement. But tonal balance control is an excellent analysis tool for understanding how your mix compares to a broad selection of commercially released music in the same genre. So for this case, you could argue it should be classical. You could use one of the other profiles. I went with jazz just because this is a jazz-like piece for me. And so the adjustments in the dynamic compression came as a response to the curve that I was seeing in tonal balance control and needing to further control resonances in those frequency areas when they occur during playing. So here's without. And here's with it engaged. So pretty subtle. What I think I realized as I was working on this piece more and more is that the nature of where the microphones were placed and the instrument itself, there was a lot of emphasis in the 250, 300 hertz range that just characteristic of the recording and how it came out. And so a lot of this processing was trying to control that problem, then adding some sweetening or some processing for aesthetic reasons that reintroduced the problem, so it had to be addressed again. A lot of mixing is like this. It's you solve one problem, then you do something creative to try to make it interesting, and then you create a new problem, you try to address it. It's this juggling act, which is part of the fun, part of the challenge. So now that we've gone through every individual process, let's listen to it in context for a little bit, and then I will turn the processing on and off so you can hear where we started in context and where we ended up. Processing off again. Back on. I also forgot to mention, so I'll just point it out here, that there is a small amount of convolution reverb on the piano just to give it some space in the mix. That seems to help with these very close mic instruments. You often need something to help them blend a little bit with everything else that's going on to make them sound a little bit more natural, because no one wants to listen to a piano with their ear next to the hammers. So I hope you enjoyed the breakdown from the mix session for the first My Miami releases. The full series is available now on the New World Symphony YouTube channel. So if you like it, please go check it out. Give it a listen. Let me know what you think. Also, put in the comments below how you deal with challenging location recordings. When your mics fail, when you're dealing with conditions that are challenging for technology, when you have a bunch of environmental noise you want to capture. It would be cool to have a conversation in the comments about your approaches when you have to deal with these situations. If you did like this breakdown and want to see additional breakdowns of the other My Miami sessions, hit the like button so I know. Be happy to walk through those and share some of my mix choices and how I cleaned up some of these recordings, because ain't nothing perfect. All right, take care. Happy Thanksgiving.